Hey everybody, Kevin Purcell with the Theotek Podcast, back every Friday morning to talk about church and Bible technology. And this morning we have a special guest with us. It's just going to be he and I today. This is Paul. You know, I never asked you this. Your Twitter feed always calls you Paul Alan Clifford. Do you prefer Paul Clifford or Paul Alan Clifford?
Well, I actually use Paul Alan Clifford online, but all my friends just call me Paul. And that's because Paul Clifford is arguably the worst book ever written. It starts out, it was a dark and stormy night. Everyone's heard that line. You thought Snoopy wrote it, but it just goes worse from there. And so if you Google Paul Clifford, you'll find this book written in the 1800s, not me.
Okay. Well, that was smart personal branding then, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad to have Paul with us today. One of the things before, we didn't know this until after I invited him to come on Theotek this week, but we both share the same alma mater, Georgetown College in Georgetown, Kentucky, and we were both philosophy majors, separated by just 1 year. I graduated and he came the next year, and so he was there while my wife was a student there. But I guess after that, he got into this church and technology gig, and now he is best known probably for his website. It is Trinity Digital Media, which I'm showing you on screen right now, and you can go over there to Trinity Digital Media, and he talks a lot about church and technology. And one of the subjects that I've noticed him often discussing is the issue of ProPresenter. One of the things that we have not talked a lot about on Theotek that I kind of hope we would have, but we just don't have enough experts in-house, and so I'm glad to have him. And that is this idea of church presentation technology. That's one of the things that's blowing up in the Christian world. It used to be that was reserved for the big mega church, and then it became all contemporary churches. And now even traditional churches like mine are installing projectors and hooking computers up to them and presenting. We throw the hymns up on the screen instead of open up the dusty old books at High Peak Baptist Church. And so I invited him to come and share some of his expertise in that area, and then other things. He's not a one-trick pony. He knows a lot about church technology in general, and so maybe we'll branch out into that. So Paul, tell us, first of all, just kind of introduce yourself a little bit more if you want. Tell us a little bit more about you and where you came from and what you do and that kind of thing, and then we can jump into talking about ProPresenter.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Kevin. So as you mentioned, I'm still living just outside of Lexington, Kentucky. Kevin, you're a big UK Wildcat fan. Here, it's just crazy because of March Madness, because they haven't lost a game yet, and they're just going crazy. So that's what I'm in the middle of right now. I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. Then I went to Georgetown College, where I met my wife. After Georgetown, I went briefly to Southern Seminary because I was raised as a Southern Baptist, and then I went to Asbury Seminary, which is where I really found my life calling. Asbury, at the time, I graduated in 2001. Asbury had one of the more technologically advanced seminaries in the country. So we had video distributed all throughout the campus, etc. So I took a class called Technology in Ministry, and I found that unlike what all my other classes were, where I would just kind of put off my homework, with the Technology in Ministry class, I'd run back to my dorm and I'd do the work there immediately and then just be starving for more. So it occurred to me, wait, this kind of crazy technology thing that I think is just how I'm odd is actually something that God made me to do. And so I've just been picking up more and more ever since. Primarily my areas of interest are social media, new media, including podcasting, videography, and more specifically ProPresenter. So that's the kinds of things that I talk about every week on my various podcasts.
Well, cool. Thank you for sharing that. That's interesting. I didn't realize that about Asbury. If I had known that, maybe I would have gone in that direction as well. I sort of am like you in that I discovered it a little bit later. I grew up in a geek's house. My dad taught electronics at the Milwaukee Area Technical College in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and so I was sort of birthed into that role in that realm, but I never really grabbed hold of it. As a kid, I was always rebelling against him in that area. I was like, I don't want to get into this stuff. That's what Dad does. And then later on, someone gave me a computer, and I thought, this is the coolest thing in the whole world. And so I found that as well. Well, we're glad that, let me turn that off. We're glad that you're here to share with us. And we just noticed Antoine was able to join us. Antoine, good morning. How are you this morning?
You guys this morning?
Doing great. What's up in your life these days, Antoine?
Being sore is part of it. I'm probably working out too much. This whole having a Fitbit and activity tracker, while it's really great, you get a little too dived into the data and start trying to push your body. So I've been a little sore lately, realizing I'm probably pushing too hard. But other than that, been pretty busy. Getting a few new opportunities to see the intersection of technology and behaviors, and so getting a chance to really explore that with some different groups. So it's pretty cool.
Well, good. We're glad that you're here. As before you got on, we were talking with Paul Clifford. He goes by Paul Alan Clifford on Twitter and other places online, but he's a church technology guru. So, Paul, you are very much a pro presenter aficionado and user, and so give us first of all, just show us a little bit of the program if you don't mind. If people aren't familiar with Pro Presenter, tell us what it is and why it's your choice for worship presentation software, and maybe if you have one or two interesting tips that maybe even people who use it a lot would find interesting and useful.
Yeah, so I'm firing it up right now on my other screen, and we'll go from there. ProPresenter, a lot of churches that do projection, they use PowerPoint, or if they're on Macs, Keynote, or what have you. Well, ProPresenter does that, but I think that it really just does it better. It's really... I tell people it's kind of like, you can get a Volkswagen, you can get a Ferrari. Both will get you point A to point B, but one, you'll just be much more happy along the journey, and that's kind of the way ProPresenter is. So in every church, you'll run into a problem where either the minister of music or worship leader will be perhaps led by the Spirit, or perhaps they'll forget a verse. Doesn't matter which it is. What matters is that the result is the same. You've got a verse that needs to be skipped. So ProPresenter allows you to do exactly that. So give me just a second and I'll get that up on my screen, and I'll show you just a little bit about what it can do. So here.
Yeah, I think one of the
click on
reasons
over
to go with these dedicated things, it's like, if you want to open a can, you can use a hammer and a screwdriver, but why not get a can opener? Because that's dedicated for that specific purpose, and so it makes your life a whole lot simpler and easier when you're doing it. And I think that church presentation software is the same thing, and I think the reason for that is building out the presentation is really where the pain is when you're using something like Keynote or PowerPoint. But if you can use one of these, they very seamlessly and quickly allow you to enter things like worship lyrics, Bible verses, and then slides for things like the pastor's PowerPoint program. A lot of them will even import PowerPoint. Does ProPresenter import it?
Yeah, Yeah, you have to have PowerPoint installed on the same machine, but it works, no problem. So here, let me
Now, do you have a
click cancel
relationship
on
with the
this.
company? Are you an employee of the company, or are you just a person who really uses it a lot and likes it?
Well, I think probably the easiest way to say it is I'm a big fan. That I have never worked with Renewed Vision, but I went through a few different worship softwares. So everyone has heard of Media Shout. We tried that. Everyone's heard of Easy Worship. We tried that. I really liked Songs Show Plus back in the day, but we had to max out our computer to just barely run it. So I thought, well, that's probably not a good plan to have a maxed out computer that you cannot do anything else with. So when I heard about ProPresenter, I started with ProPresenter 3, and I just thought that it was the most intuitive that I'd used and the most powerful. So on my screen here we have ProPresenter, and you'll notice you've got different slides that you can select. You can change backgrounds at any time. I'm using this background down here, but I could use this one here just as easily. Clicking around from one slide to another is really simple, and you can change the look of it very easily as well. So I could go up here to the template and go to let's see here, this one. Nope, that one didn't actually change anything. Oh, yeah, it did a little bit. So it's just a one-click operation to go to whatever template you want. So you'll see I changed it there as well. Those aren't exactly good examples of the way that you would want it to be, but it does that just very quickly and easily. So it's things like that that I think are little things that most churches would just love to do. And generally, I'm not a big fan of the Christian version of stuff. I'm not a big fan of GodTube, for example. Just changing you to God doesn't make it somehow superior. But in the case of ProPresenter, where you might need to add songs on the fly, oh, worship leader just called for this one. Okay, so I'll bring that up. You know, you can do that. Or you can go back, or you can skip around. Things that you actually need in a church, it can do. So that's what I really like about it, and just the feel of it feels to me like someone who did this in a church said, I think I can make better software, as opposed to some of the other products feel like a software developer heard that the tech people were struggling and tried to make something to help them, which is a subtle distinction, but it's just, it feels like you have a problem and there's something in the software that can solve it. So
I think I agree with you wholeheartedly about that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but as a
no, go ahead.
I really like Media Shout, sort of, and that is because I'm comparing it to PowerPoint. But I get the feeling more and more in each new version of it that these are people who spend their whole day developing software instead of people who work in churches presenting on Sunday morning. And so the solutions that they have for problems are more, it feels like more like developer solutions than church technologist solutions. You know, so the thing you're saying is, on the user end, it's more user friendly than some of the others. Am I characterizing the way you said that correctly?
That's the way it feels to me.
Yeah.
So it feels to me like anytime you have a problem, there is some feature of it that will solve it. So it's not perfect by any means. The Bible integration is, well, it's fine if you want to show one verse by itself, or you've got like a scripture reading, and if Kevin, I know you're a pastor, but us church tech guys, sometimes we have this feeling like the pastor comes up last minute with this idea that the Lord himself gave him, and I'm pretty sure that the Holy Spirit is part of the Trinity still, and so knows stuff ahead of time, so could have told the pastor. I don't know if the pastor wasn't listening or just wasn't ready. I don't know any of that stuff. I don't want to guess, but when it comes to like a scripture reading, hey, real quick, we're going to add the 23rd Psalm right after the second song. Can you go ahead and work on that during this first song? That happens, and the ProPresenter makes it easy, whereas PowerPoint, it would be virtually impossible because your computer is like taken over by that, and it's just too late. So,
now see,
yeah.
That's interesting. That's an interesting scenario you bring up, Paul. Some years back, I was a part of a church in Annapolis, Bay Area Community Church, and we used to use live worship for our needs. And I remember very distinctly, jumping in to serve at that church. And hey, Antoine, you're a techie. Can you figure out live worship? And it just so happens you're going to figure it out during our evening service on Sundays. And that was exactly one of the situations that came up. Move the Holy Spirit moment, and a new scripture came in. But what I noticed about live worship, and after that I was able to get some time into it, is that we actually had the entire text of scripture saved as a library inside there, so we could actually go to it and import it immediately into our deck pretty immediately. Now, there was another group, of course, that had PowerPoint, and they would use that. Some of our smaller ministries wouldn't use live worship, but they would use PowerPoint. They were in other rooms, and the license restrictions prevented us from doing that. But we taught them how to use dual monitors, not expanding the screen or duplicating, but actually utilizing two screens, so they can kind of get around that. In live worship, though, we had that Bible that was a part of the library. Is that the same thing that you notice in ProPresenter, that you're able to actually have that Bible already imported there, so you can kind of adapt on the fly when maybe the pastor wants to start a little earlier with verses, or go a little later, or add another verse in there?
Yeah, absolutely, Antoine. In fact, here I'll go back over to ProPresenter and I'll show you the Bible feature. And there is on the very top here a Bibles icon. I click on that, and then I can import any Bible that I wanted. The ones that are still under copyright, like the New Living Translation, NIV, basically any modern translation will cost a little extra because, as Jesus and the Apostle Paul both said, the worker is worth his wages. So that's the case. Here on my home machine, I didn't bother paying for those because I'm not presenting for a church. I'm just showing people how to use them. So let's say I wanted to go with the Bible in Basic English, which is a free version here. I can change that. I can select the book. Let's say I was in Proverbs this morning, Proverbs 27. So I can do that, and that brings up the entire chapter. Proverbs 27, was it 7? No. So let's see, that's a little small to read. Maybe I can make it a little bit bigger. So I can do that as well. And if the pastor decides, we're going to start with verse 5, and I hear yeah, we're going to start with verse 5 and then we're going to end with verse 6. No problem, but what happens if, oh yeah, it turns out verse 7 is really good too. And what about verse 8? And we're just going to keep going through verse 9. No problem, I just click on those. So that's great for that. For the sermon notes, I wouldn't necessarily use this. This is one of the shortcomings because, you know, I can add it here, but then what if the pastor has an inspirational quote or a picture? That's less good. So I normally have a separate message notes section for that. So that's just something that I love about it.
Cool. So let me ask both of you this question as well, because this came to mind. Kevin, I know we've talked about worship presentation software in previous Theoteks. Have you guys found, because I mean, I'm the weird guy of the bunch. I built my own Bible software. My presentation decks are our HTML5 deck that I've built from scratch. So I'm definitely the other side of a presenter's window. But in my case, my notes and my presentation deck can connect to one another pretty seamlessly. Do you find that you're able to go back and forth pretty easily between maybe Logos and Pro Presenter or Media Shout? Or is it still, kind of the copy paste going back and forth between the two? So, you're doing your sermon prep and you may be using Logos, to do that, but now you have to go to that other software suite in order to import your items, or is there some kind of export-import between those two pieces of software so that, kind of simplifies or smooths that process a little bit?
Yeah, there's two ways to do it. You could, well, actually, there's multiple. What I hear a lot of churches doing is the pastor will create his own PowerPoint and then want to import that. I don't think that's a very good idea at all. I think PowerPoint's too limited, so I wouldn't recommend it, but that's a possibility. What I typically do in my situation is I copy and paste everything into a text document, because once you have your text document with double space in between slides, you import it and you're done. So that is probably the easiest way to go about doing that. So, copy and paste into Logos. There is you might have heard of Planning Center Online. It has Planning Center Online integration as well. So you could theoretically set up everything in Planning Center and then have that connected to ProPresenter, and then the volunteer gets there on Sunday morning and just opens up ProPresenter and it's all there. So that's another kind of powerful way to do it. But there's no direct Logos connection, at least not right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there ever will be, to be quite honest with you, because of they've now created something called Proclaim, their own proprietary presentation software.
Right.
So I don't see them partnering with anyone else. This is that Planning Center Online that you were talking about. Do you use this, Paul, to work with and create with your team of people that you regularly work with, or have you?
Yeah. So there was a time, my church is really big, so there was a time where if it was on the screen, I touched it, but over the years we've broken that all out. So I don't myself create anything in Planning Center Online, but I'm scheduled on a weekly basis in Planning Center. I get notes, I check it on the app, double check if I'm off on a weekend or if I'm on, etc. So you can absolutely do that. And Planning Center is itself also a basic presentation software. So Kevin, a little higher up on the screen, they showed from an iPad right there. someone presenting, and that's exactly what it was. It's very basic, but you can connect an iPad to your projector either through an Apple TV or with the connector that will take that into VGA on the end and do it that way. Since it's from a tablet or a phone, it's simple, which is the plus. Since it's from a tablet or a phone, it's simple, which is the minus 2. It's not as feature-rich as ProPresenter is, but I think it's just something that would be appropriate to churches just getting started, no problem.
This is another issue. Is when you say 50 people, $30 a month, oh, that's affordable. If you're a church of 50 people, that means someone is going to volunteer to pay that $30 a month. The church is never going to pay that price. At 50 people or less, your church is on a shoestring budget, and you're lucky if you can pay the pastor. At 150 people, $50 a month, that's, in my opinion, that's very unlikely. Here's the good deal. Strangely, the church that can easily afford it gets the best price because at that size they can eat the $100 a month without as much difficulty. So I find this in worship and church software by subscription model all the time, and that is their prices are out of whack at the low end. They think that $15 or $30, that's not much, but they don't live in that atmosphere, and so. But it still looks like a neat feature, and it also looks like you mentioned how simple it is. It seems like they're kind of focusing on the idea of you importing PowerPoint and Keynote for the actual sermon presentation side of it, which is what I focus on. Whereas things like ProPresenter or MediaShout or others, if you're able to make slides, it's a lot easier to just do them natively. But I really am not that familiar with Planning Center because I've never used it because of that price issue. But I'm, for those who have, I'm glad that it has it built in, and I think MediaShout has that as well. So, but MediaShout's become just cumbersome and unstable. So at this point, I would not recommend it to anybody who doesn't already own it. That's the only reason we're stuck with it, because we already own it.
Yeah, I would have to clarify, but I'm not sure that those prices are people in your congregation. I think those prices are people using the software.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's I was being unfair then.
Yeah, if you have a total of 20 people making the service possible, then $15 a month. You're probably a church of 200 that would have that size team. So $15 to $20 a month would be much more in line than, we've only got 25 people in the congregation and we're going to charge you $14 a month. If you've got 25 people in your congregation, you're lucky to keep the lights on, and you're probably sharing a pastor.
Yeah, or he's bivocational, which a lot of churches do. Yeah, you're correct. Here's the explanation of that. What does the number of people include? Each package allows you to use a different number of people in your planning and scheduling. This number includes all volunteers you will be scheduling and all the staff members who will be scheduling volunteers or accessing services. The number is not the number of people. See that? Not the number of people in your attendance. And they need to clarify that and probably make that up here where people will do like I did. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is most church subscription services, when they're showing this kind of a number, that's how many people are in your church.
Right.
So it's rare that they break it down that size. It's usually something like, if it is that, it's 100 or less. So that should have stood out to me, but it didn't. So what was that, Antoine?
Well, I'm gonna throw. Yeah, I was gonna throw a little wrench in there because Planning Center reminds me of basic pieces of organizational software. But generally speaking, those are numbers that you would see on a per user basis, not a per population basis. It's only when you deal with bigger contracts, much bigger contracts,
Right.
Where you deal with multi-user licensing, per person licensing. For example, check-in software that a lot of us use, or if anybody's using giving or kiosk software that's based on per person that donates. They usually some of those software suites will also price per size of church, not just per user.
Right. Yeah, and when you think about it, that makes a lot more sense. If everyone is using the software, whether they're using it or not, you should charge for everyone that's using it. You know, for check-in, everyone that has kids is using the check-in software, even if they don't touch a computer in their life, because the volunteers at church are saying, hey, give me the last 4 digits of your phone number, for example. Okay, your kid is checked in, here's your sticker. Or like a church database software where, you know, little Mildred, who's 100 years old, may not even be sure what a computer does, but she's in the database because the pastor wants to know when she hits 101 so that there can be a big celebration for her, you know, that kind of thing. So that makes sense, I think. Another one that does it that way is some of the live streaming companies. Like I use churchstreaming.tv, and they do it on a per congregation basis because that's the potential audience. You know, it could be like here in Kentucky, about 3 weeks ago, the snow was so bad. It wouldn't be bad in like Boston, but you know, if we have more than a foot of snow, it shuts down everything. So we didn't cancel church, we just moved it online, and that was perfectly okay to do. So that's something else that I think it tends to make sense when you think about it. How many people are going to use it, that's typically what the pricing structure is.
That's an interesting thought that I had never ever had before this year. I'm not sure why, because we've been streaming our worship services for a number of years now. But I'd heard of other people saying the same thing, that they moved their services online. And I actually think that next winter, at the beginning of the winter, I will, at some point, you know, when it looks like we're starting to threaten snow, I'll say, all right, and if we, you know, are ever threatening snow, just remember we won't be canceling service, but I can get over to the church, I'll turn things on, and I'll, you know, lead a song and then go have a prayer and go right into my message, and so that we can actually have church. But, and of course, with online giving today, a lot of people do that, and so you can even take up an offering. It's all right. Now, everybody pull out your credit card, click on the button next to the screen there, and make sure you give generously, because we're going to be hurting today.
Well, so what happened for us is we had, like Thursday, it was decent. You know, it wasn't sunny, but it was okay. So our pastor went over to the church. One of the other tech guys went over, recorded the sermon ahead of time, and then said, we'll just keep this in our back pocket in case we need it. And so the tech guy who's in charge of such things had it set up that, you know, if Saturday it looked like it was going to be as bad as it actually was on Sunday, that they'd just send out messages through, you know, send out an email to the email newsletter list, send out Facebook updates, every way that we could get the message out, and let people know, no, don't injure yourself trying to get to church, just watch it online, you know, and it worked really well. So that's what my family of 4 did. We all huddled around our TV and watched it.
Well, you know, we've been using it at our church. We say, if you're going on vacation, still come to church. And a lot of people do that. They'll be away on Sunday morning, but they'll still plug in, and that way they can participate. Now, personally, my preference, I would say, go try out another church somewhere, so that you can get a, you know what I'm saying, to get sort of a feel for what other people are doing. But you know, that's still an interesting possibility, and that's what we're doing. let's see here. Give us,
Let me ask,
you can, Paul.
can I throw another question?
Go ahead, Antoine. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. My audio is a little slow here, so it might sound like I'm cutting over you. I apologize for that. Paul, one of the other things that we ran into over at Bay Area, and I've got a few other friends, number of other tech teams, their respective tech teams, is that those persons who do the live worship, the pro presenter, who may deal with sound and audio, while they are in the connected from being as a part of the community during that time of worship. Has your church or the churches that you've been involved with consulting with around Pro Presenter and other software, have they done anything to kind of mitigate that for maybe their AV teams? Or doing specifically for when I did live worship, it was great to be in the back and setting slides up, but the spirit hit me, and now I'm a few seconds late in making a transition, and I realize I can't really be a part of this service while I'm being an admin. Is there any steps that you've given for churches in that space?
Well, I think there are a few things to consider. We used to have a worship pastor who would say dual track, and our former senior pastor used to say that God doesn't call you to things that are contradictory. So I think that those two philosophical things might help if you say, okay, here's what we want you to do. We want you to participate in worship. Think of what you're doing as worship. Don't think of it as, hey, I get to goof off in the back of the room, which can be a challenge if a lot of your people are teenagers or something like that. But if you're dealing primarily with adults, casting that vision, I think, helps. And then if the people who are doing it actually think of this as, no, I'm part of the worship team. My instrument is a computer, so I'm worshiping by helping everyone see. My standpoint, I think Bill Hybels talks about a can't stand it moment. I can't stand that people wouldn't be able to interact with the message. I can't stand the thought that I would have the ability to stop people from rustling in hymnals and singing down as opposed to singing out, so that we can all participate as a congregation. The thought is, I guess it's just how I'm made. So I think from a philosophical standpoint, that's one way of doing it. We try never to have someone who is on solidly. Everyone should have some time to actually be in the congregation, and that's what I would recommend as well. Although, things happen, and there was a time in my life where for 18 months I was behind a switcher every single weekend, every single Wednesday. Anytime we had a service, I was there, and God carried me through that. So I don't want to say, oh yeah, you don't need to just be a part of the main congregation, because I think that you do. But I also think that if someone says, well, I can't worship because I'm on the computer, you need to work with that individual. Maybe they can't worship and be on the computer, but other people, I think, can worship by being on the computer. That's you don't say, well, the guitarist can't worship because he's playing the guitar. No, you give a guitarist a guitar and he will worship by using that. So it's a subtle shift, but I think it helps.
That's a great way of looking at it that I've never really thought of before, because I've always been of the mindset, while they're doing their work in the tech crew, they're not really worshiping, and it's a shame, and I wish we could find a way so that we'd have more volunteers so that fewer people would have to do it, or more people could do it and less people would have to do it all the time. Like at our church, we don't have anybody helping our sound guy. We have 2 people who can do it in a pinch, but they won't do it on a regular basis. They'll only do it when it's desperate, and so that I don't like that. It's unfortunate, but it's just the battles of a small church. But maybe I need to talk to him and say, hey, think of it as worship. Maybe that'll help him a little bit. We need to find someone else to help him, but until we do, that's a good viewpoint. When you look at going back to ProPresenter, Paul, do you find it easier for? First of all, let me ask you this question: where you've used it regularly, does the pastor do visual presentations, or is it more of just he puts his verse up there and gives you the text of his main points and that's it? Or does he put lots of pictures and video interspersed into the service?
Yeah, I should say that my church is a very contemporary church. In fact, this might sound like it's anathema to some churches, and trust me, the Lord Jesus likes all our art. We're like children to Him. So we do rock very regularly, and occasionally we even do rap. So that's the thing that some churches will go, what? That's evil, that's from the devil, just like they did in the 90s about rock. So we're very contemporary in how we do that. So it would be unusual if it was only text that the pastor put up. Usually there's at least a few images. Quite often there are videos, and so that's one reason why we use ProPresenter, is because it gives you the flexibility to have all those things in one presentation, and once it's created, it's just linear. Tap the space bar, go from point A to point B to point C, then a video, then back to an image, etc. So it works really well like that. And if the pastor realizes, oh no, I wrote like an hour and a half worth of stuff and I'm only supposed to speak for 50 minutes or a half an hour or whatever, you can cut different pieces very easily. So that's one good thing about ProPresenter.
Well, that's interesting. Does it have lots of visual media with it, or is it just a small sampling? And then, if not, where do you get what's your source of media to put into it?
Yeah, so it does have a small sampling. Comes with some backgrounds, but there's Church Motion Graphics makes. Actually, they have I think it's $99 a year. You can get just a pack every month of new motion graphics, and that's a guy in Canada actually who does those. So that's one place. We've found stuff on Sermon Spice. We've found stuff on even Vimeo if it's licensed appropriately. So there are a lot of outlets for that, and we make our own stuff. So one of the revolutions in video is what I'm about to show you here. This is a DSLR. In fact, this is a Canon T3i. It's not a super expensive DSLR. It's a few $100s. But the video that it creates is phenomenal because of the way the sensor works. It just looks like it was shot on film. So the first time we had a video that we created on a DSLR, my wife leaned over to me and said, "Man, it's too bad we can't make something like that." And I said, "We actually did. That's over in the UK." Then you go, "What? How? Huh?" And I said, yeah, we got a new camera that makes it look really nice. And then she was, of course, a little concerned that we'd spent, $100,000 on a really nice camera, and no, it was $700 on an okay camera. So that's something that I think that more and more churches are going to find themselves getting into video production. Maybe not on the extreme low end of churches, but more and more. It's not the case that you choose between an organ and technology anymore. It's the case where for very little money you can get a pretty nice production nowadays.
Have you used just this week? I don't know if you used the Bible app from YouVersion. And one of the things that I found interesting for this discussion is they've come up with a new way to create these Bible memes, basically, where you can select your verse and then pick a nice little background and put it up there. I'll show you one that I made and posted on Facebook this week. I just, I thought that looked, it's not astonishingly great, but that actually to me looks better than what I normally produce on Sunday morning for Media Shout, where I, just use their Bible importer. And so I think I might find I think I will find myself using this a little bit more often to make my Bible slides to present for church, not just to post on Facebook. Now, the aspect ratio is a little off, and so, I don't know how that'll affect whether I'll do it or not. I might try it out. Have you used this this week? Have you seen this at all, and would you recommend doing something like that?
Yes, here, let me share it with you, because I also put it on Facebook, and so let me slide on over. Oops, scrolling a little wonky, but I was reading in Proverbs today. We had a series a couple of months ago where the challenge was to read through Proverbs, and I got busy, so I didn't. So now I'm catching up. So this is from Proverbs 27:14, and I'm a little surprised I don't see the citation here. Maybe I clicked on something, but right before we got on this morning, I found this and I thought, oh, this is a perfect opportunity to use this. A loud and cheerful greeting early in the morning will be taken as a curse. So that's quite often the truth, is that in the morning it feels like someone being nice is not. So I created that one. Love it.
I really like this feature. I think it looks neat, and I think I will use it going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you don't know what we're talking about, the Bible app from YouVersion, if you just go into your app store, whether it's the iOS or Android, then you can find it. Here's one our good friend Wes made at his website, painfullyhopeful.me, and I don't know, I sort of thought that was quite inspirational that he created that. You'll have to read his blog post. Go over to painfullyhopeful.me and hit posts at the top in order to find this. He's actually got a real good reason for putting that in there. But I showed that to my son, and he's still not quite out of that adolescent phase, even though he's 20 years old. and he just laughed hysterically about that. But no, I think it's a good feature. You might want to check that out if you're into using the Bible app. What I find interesting about this whole worship presentation area is there isn't really a good dedicated iPad or tablet app yet. We had on someone that had made something called Church. Was it what was the name of that, Antoine? The guy that we had on that made the app that you can use to do presentation software. I can't remember the name of the app.
Oh man, good question, because I can't.
Anyway, it was very early stages for the app. It didn't feel quite finished yet, and that's why I haven't really used it much. But I want to say Church Presenter. Was that it? Anyway,
can't remember.
You can look that up and find it. But does Pro Presenter? I know we saw that it had Planning Center integration. Does it have maybe a remote feature that you can use your iPad or your Android tablet or your phone or iPhone to control it at least, even if you can't do a full presentation with it?
Yeah, it's got two apps that I think would be particularly helpful in the church. App number one that doesn't do what you're talking about but might be helpful is it's got a stage display app. So you can basically set up all the musicians or set up the pastor with this app, and they can watch what's on the screen through Wi-Fi. So that's a nice little feature that you don't have to run cables necessarily. You know, Kevin, when you're preaching on a Sunday morning, if someone was running ProPresenter behind you and instead of doing this number, which is a personal pet peeve of mine to see the pastor doing like that. I don't like turning around to look at the screen unless the point is to point at the screen. You know, that's something totally different. But just, hey, is this up? And looking back, so there's that app, and that's a great one. You can also connect that to a screen and show that, or you can show the stage display using wires or what have you. That's number one. The one that you actually asked about, though, is the remote control app. So there is a remote control app that works either on iPhone or iPad. They don't have one for Android just yet, but Renewed Vision started out as Mac-only software, and then they, in the last couple of years, they added a PC version. So I expect that they'll eventually add an Android remote control app. It's probably on the to-do list, but as of right now, it's iOS only. So.
Yeah, here is the App Store page, if I can get it up here on the screen, that shows, you know, the presentation app. Here's the iPhone version and then the iPad version. Unfortunately, after you've spent a lot of money for ProPresenter, they're going to ask you for another $5 for the app. I'm a cheapskate, if you haven't noticed, so so little things like this sort of get me. But anyway, and then of course this is the stage display app that you were talking about, which adds another $10 to the cost. But for someone who's wanting this desperately, this is a useful tool. MediaShout has one, but we haven't really used it that much because our Wi-Fi in our sanctuary often is a little wonky, and I'm scared to death that the person controlling it will be sitting on the floor next to his wife, or her next to her mother. Those are the two volunteers that we have using it, and then the Wi-Fi is going to knock out right in the middle of the song or something, and everybody's going to be looking up there at the balcony. Why is that not working? You know. But anyway, so I don't know how have you used this? Is it pretty reliable if you've got decent Wi-Fi?
Yeah, every time that I've used it, as long as it can connect initially, it seems to work. On a more complex network, sometimes, you know, that can be a problem where different subnets, it doesn't want to cross those. So we have a problem because our church, as I say, is pretty good size, and our IT guy has all the wired computers on one network and all the wireless computers on the other. So the computer itself that displays the lyrics is on one network, and then if you pull out your iPhone and try and connect, it just won't see it. So that's one problem that I see. But at our Frankfort, Kentucky campus, I was able to control it fine. Now, like you, maybe if I was using it every week and using that consistently by the computer just to see if it worked, and then at any moment I could bail out to it, maybe I would have learned to trust it. But I just could see being in the sanctuary next to my wife, and all of a sudden it cuts out or something goes wrong, and I'd have to run back and fix it. And so said, I won't actually try that.
Yeah, I understand. That's wired is far more faithful and also more reliable. And I've had too many times where the people in my church know that I'm heavily involved in the technology in our church, and so when things go wrong, I always have this incredibly embarrassed feel, and I get get hot, and and you can tell I'm already very ruddy complected, and I get even more so when those kinds of things take place. So, well, that's great. I really appreciate you showing off ProPresenter to us today. Have you ever used very many church communication tools for like mass communication all at once? The reason I asked this is I read an article this week about someone who talked about how they're using Google Voice in their church. I don't know if you're familiar with Google Voice. I'm sure you two are, but those of you who are watching this, Google Voice is when you sign up for a Gmail account and any Google account or maybe a Google Apps account, they'll give you a Google Voice account that you can set up. It'll give you a dedicated phone number in your area code, so it's not long distance, although long distance is becoming a thing of the past because of the way carriers work with their phone systems. But they're talking about how they're using Google Voice to people. They put the phone number out there. People text things like questions. They post Google Voice messages that the church and congregation are using in their services, and I just found that really interesting. I know that I've heard of places where people will set up a Twitter account and people will tweet during the service, and then at the end of the service the pastor will respond to some of those tweets. That's the kind of thing we're talking about here, and I can share the article with you on the screen, and it shows some of the ways that they're using it. As I said, for questions, people submit prayer requests using it, indicating a response. For example, they'll just do a live survey and let people do that. Collecting emails, folks can send email through it, collect stories, and let's take a survey. Have you ever done anything like this, either of you? Let's start with you, Antoine. Have you ever used anything like this in a church setting?
In church setting, pretty much in every setting. I can't say I was the first person to do it, but I want to say maybe 5 or 6 years ago, at several presentations, I made it a strong point to say, hey, listen, this is a presentation. This is what I'm going to be talking about. If you want to connect on Twitter, you can use hashtag XYZ, or if you're talking on wherever else. And if you have any questions to throw out, we'll go ahead and look at those questions afterwards. If it was a small group, larger groups, you kind of just let the back chat be part of the back chat. And I've obviously that's something that's kind of evolved over time. And the idea of having a Twitter back chat or a Facebook back chat where folks are talking about the sermon, talking about the service, talking about a presentation while you're speaking about it, it's really good. It's very helpful. If you are in a large ministry, a good deal of large ministries, they are able to not just have that back chat happen, but they have questions posed there, and somebody vets those questions, and that person's able to answer it later. But yeah, definitely something I've utilized, and it's actually really helpful for getting some immediate feedback about something that you said or not said.
Yeah. Paul, have you?
Yeah, we sure have. Not as much as I'd like. I'd love for us to do things like, hey, text this to here, but we recently had a change in leadership at my church, and for the business meeting for the members, although we don't call them that, but the business meeting for the members, they said, hey, text your questions here and we'll absolutely answer them. And so we had someone who was on the stage with the interim pastor, who's now our senior pastor, reading off the questions and just answering them right then and there. And I think that was really good, because one of the questions I asked was about some of the financial stuff, and they were able to be transparent with us, and they might have not known exactly the question he had, basically we had some property that has been up for sale for, like 7 or 8 years, and there was an offer on it, and the question I had was, does that offer cover the cost of the property? And the answer was that it didn't cover the cost of the property, but it was more important for us to get as close to out of debt on that property as we could than to hope that in another 7 or 8 years maybe someone would pay us what we had paid for it. So, and I agreed wholeheartedly with that, but that was just an example of how we did this. And going back to ProPresenter, it does have a Twitter module that you can search on a certain hashtag or get all the tweets from a certain account. Or what I would recommend is it has the ability that someone can curate those tweets. So you could, let's say, you could have a hashtag for a conference that your church is hosting, and then have someone curating those and approving all the legitimate ones, where if it was a trending topic in your town, maybe some marketer would hop on it and try and hijack that. So you could eliminate that as a possibility with that ability. So.
Yeah, that can be a little embarrassing. I think you definitely want to curate those tweets, even if you got some, teenage kid who's got a Twitter account that doesn't personally identify him in any way. He can prank you pretty bad, and it could get quite embarrassing and offensive, even if you're not careful. Yeah, I find that very interesting. I've not had the courage yet to try it. Of course, I'm in a very traditional church with mostly seniors, and so we haven't really worked on that something. But that might be something that we could do as a future topic, Antoine. We ought to talk about using social media in the worship service sometime. We've talked a lot about social media. Last week or 2 weeks ago, Antoine and I spent most of the episode talking about a church policy, and we came up with what we call the commandments for social media for Christians, where we said you should, in fact, I posted that on my website, kevinpurcell.org, if people are interested in checking that out. It's up on there finally. I've been a little behind in posting the audio of our shows here lately, but life gets busy sometimes. But Paul, we're really glad that you've chosen to join us. Were you getting ready to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say something challenging, not super challenging, but just something to consider. Is I'm 41 years old, Kevin. I think that you're in your mid-40s, just based on when you graduated from college. So I want you to think back. Think of how you're viewing technology right now. Now, think back to 1984 when the Macintosh was introduced. Someone our age, early to mid-40s, in 1984, that's 30 years ago. So if someone thought about technology in their early to mid-40s 30 years ago, that means they're in their early to mid-70s today. So just because someone is older doesn't mean that they're necessarily not into technology. It could be that you've got some secret technology buffs in your congregation that just are happy to sit on the sidelines, and you can call them up to more even though they're retirement age.
Yeah. Well, I understand you saying that. Of course, I've had conversations personally with many of these folks. We're in a small enough church that I know everybody by name and have regular conversations with most of them over a month's period of time. And I know that probably half of them, the computer is that thing that you use, preacher. So that's where we're at with a lot of them. But no, we do have more younger people in our kind of a congregation than most people. Most churches of our kind today are 55 and over is about 70%, whereas with us, I'd say it's probably more like about 50%, which is unusual for a traditional rural Southern Baptist church. But no, I appreciate that sentiment, and I need to think that way too, that just because they're older doesn't mean they're idiots. My dad, is in his 70s, and he's very technologically savvy. So we have to remember that. Listen, we really appreciate you being here. We try to keep this thing at about an hour, and we've gone over that now, but I thought it was really interesting, and you've actually, made me think, I might take another look at ProPresenter as a solution for our church, because we've become so frustrated with what we're doing now. In fact, we went to PowerPoint for a little while because it had become so unstable. A recent update solved some of those problems, but it's a useful tool. Again, just remind people, if maybe someone jumped on here later or whatever, remind people of where they can follow you online, and if you got anything you want to plug that's coming up new.
Yeah, so you can find me at trinitydigitalmedia.com. That's my main site. Every week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, I have a show that premieres at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific on churchtechcast.com. All those are spelled the normal way. And I have just launched something. It was very, maybe God was in the timing of this, Kevin, that since I love ProPresenter so much, I got in touch with Renewed Vision, the company that makes it, and asked their permission to use the name of the software in this domain that I'm about to tell you, which is learnpropresenterfast.com. And it's first off, it's a mini course that you can take for free, along with some of my favorite tips, like using video with transparency. And then later on, there is a paid element that if you want to go really deep, arms and elbows into ProPresenter, or you just want to buy it once, so that every time you get a new volunteer, you can say, here, in your own time, do this, and then they can get up to speed really quickly. That has a component of that as well. So, yep, that's it, and that's me.
There it is, with your
exact same chair.
All right, cool. Well, we'll definitely check that out. We appreciate your being with us today. And Antoine, how about you? Got anything you want to plug or talk about before we close up shop today?
Oh gosh, probably, but it's been that kind of a busy week for me as well, so I really don't know what's coming up on my calendar even this afternoon. Just stay tuned to myself at AntoineRJWright.com or ARJWright on Twitter, and stuff will fly out from there.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you guys so much, and as always, we're going to be doing this every Friday morning, and occasionally we might throw in an extra one, a Theotek Extra. We've done one or two of those before, and next week I'm excited. I don't know if any of you are Accordance Bible software users, but Accordance just came out with a newly updated iPad app. Makes it much more useful. I personally wasn't a big fan of their mobile app before, but next week we're going to have Rick Mansfield back with us. He was with us when Accordance 11 came out and showed off the program, and so he'll be with us showing off that new app so that we can see all the new features of it. It's still missing one or two things, but I think it's gotten a lot better, and I think you'll be really interested to see in that next Friday morning. But this has been the Theotek Podcast. Thank you for joining us. We're glad you all watched. Hopefully you'll subscribe to this on YouTube. If you are listening to it, you can listen on our website when I post it. Normally, until the last couple of weeks, I've been doing so on either Monday or Tuesday mornings following the weekend, and then you could also grab it through iTunes and Stitcher Radio. Find those links at theotek.com. You'll be able to grab the hold of those and download it onto your device of choice that you prefer to listen to audio podcasts. But thanks for being with us today.